Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to test out a brand new paintbrush and I'm going to show you how to paint greenery in about 14 ways with this one brush. It's brand new, so I thought it'd be a good fun way to test it out and do a little review as well. So this is the Princeton Velvet Touch brush. It's a size 8. I also have another Princeton that I use often. It's a size 8 in the Neptune line. So just comparing these two, the one on the left is a brand new one and has a really fine point, and the one on the right, when it's dry it doesn't, but when I get it wet, which I'll show you here, it does come to a nice fine point, so you can get thin delicate lines. I've been wanting to try out the Velvet Touch line though, and I've heard a lot about how it's got an amazing fine line point, so I wanted to test it out. And here's a close-up. I just got them both a little damp so you can see the difference in the length and the tips of the brushes. So you'll need some water, your watercolor paints, paper, and then I also have a paper towel on hand just for a little dabbing away of any excess water or paint. And then I also like to spritz my palette with a little mister, which I actually got this in the garden section at, I think, Target. But I love it, and it's a quick way to just wake up your palette. Alright, so for this first version, I'll do a really simple leafy branch. So it's a thin line to start, and then from that I'm doing a slight pressure down and then picking up at the end of each of these little leaves and creating a little leafy branch. One of the first things I noticed about this brush is it does have an amazing fine line tip at the end. You can get some really delicate little lines, which is really nice to have your broader strokes and your thinner strokes in one brush. It makes painting a lot faster, a little bit more efficient that way. So for this second version, I'm doing some really short V marks, sort of like tiny little V shapes on each of the little branches. And then you can cluster them up together and just make it as dense or light as you like. So for the third style, I wanted to try a wider leaf, just a single wide one. And the way you do that is you just start with a small tiny spot, and then from there you push down on your brush. And this one I'm pushing as far as it goes just to see how big of a leaf I can get from this one brush. The more pressure you push down, the wider that leaf will be, and then towards the end of the leaf you can pick up that brush and leave a really light, delicate point. In this fourth version, I'm using the end of the brush and just making some really light, delicate branch marks. I put a little bit more brown and purple in that color. This one is the fifth version, so this is a little bit more berry-like, or maybe like a little eucalyptus-like. They're wider, circular ends, and then the thin lines in the branch area. This one is similar to the branch that we did with just the thin lines, but this time I'm adding these little bulb-like bits on the end. Okay, so this one is a little bit like maybe rosemary. It's got little clusters of leaves that go down the branch. And all I'm doing is putting 4 leaves for each of the clusters and a thin branch down the center. This one is our 8th version of greenery. And this time I wanted to see if I could get some really fine, sharp, pointed ends for each of these leaves. And this version is a little bit like a palm leaf. So I'm using some very thin lines towards that top, and then as you get towards the bottom, those little individual leaves get a little bit longer. And I'm keeping them pretty wavy and thin off that center line. This is a really fun one to paint. So for number 10, Start with a loose branch-like structure and leave some spaces in between. And then I have a lighter yellow-green here, and I'm adding clusters of leaves to each of the branches, maybe around 3 or 4 for each branch. While it's still damp, you can go in and drop in some darker green shades into the wet areas and have a little bit of a natural gradation of color happen that way. Alright, so the last one was pretty organic. This one's going to be a little bit more symmetrical. So I'm using tiny teardrop shapes for each side of these leaves. And as you move down the branch, you'll make these a little bit wider and a little bit bigger. The other thing that I noticed with this brush is I haven't had to redip that color, so it holds quite a bit of color and paint. I was able to get this whole branch painted without redipping for color. Now I'm just using that paper towel to pick up any extra paint and color. It's a pickup technique. You can use your brush like a sponge, just dip it in there and dab it off. So I have this sitting on my desk, this little bit of dried up foliage. I really like the way that it has wide leaves and then it also has a little berry-like little shapes. It's a nice combination of textures and contrast in shape. So starting with the branch in the middle with those thin lines and then putting in a few of the wider leaves. And then to make the little clusters, I'm using smaller little branch shapes and then just dotting in the little ends. Okay, so for the next one, it's a little bit fuzzy. I don't know if that's a really technical term, but I'm using one main leaf structure in the middle and then using the end of the brush while it's still wet to pull out these little fine lines. Okay, so this one is similar to the third version that we did, which is the wide leaf. I wanted to do another set of these and try doing a double layer where I build up one layer and then add in details on a second layer. So while those are drying, we'll work on the foliage number 14. So I'm making each of these individual leaves a little bit like a fan. Start with that centerpiece and then put some shorter ones on the side. And then I'm keeping them to clusters of 3. Looks a little bit like cilantro. Alright, so that first set has dried a bit and I can go in with a second layer and add in some darker details like a shadow line or some texture lines. So I have to say this brush is pretty amazing and I'm really happy that I purchased it. So if you want to know where I got it, I'll link it below. It actually is quite versatile. As you can see, we've got roughly 14 leaf shapes and styles. There's a variety of structures and different transparencies, and this brush is really flexible. You can get really fine lines and wide strokes, and I would consider it kind of a thirsty brush, as in it holds a lot of paint and water in each, I guess, dip of color. I hope you had so much fun painting along with me. And if you recreate this, please tag me if you post it on social media. Tag me with Paper Wand so I don't miss it. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.